The metallic tang of recycled air hit my secondary nostrils as I stepped into docking bay 7, all 4 of my arms laden with sample cases from my latest shipment. Trade station, Kepler 442, hummed with its usual cacophony. The chittering of Zephyrian merchants haggling over rare minerals, the deep harmonic tones of Thrikari negotiations, and beneath it all, the soft hum of artificial gravity generators keeping us anchored to something resembling normal. What struck me as odd was the humans. In the 3 cycles I'd been trading through this sector, I'd grown accustomed to their peculiar habits. Where other species would posture and threaten when tensions rose, humans simply carried on. Even now, with hegemony warships massing just 2 systems away, and their diplomatic ultimatums growing more aggressive by the day, the human merchants moved through the market with that same unsettling calm. "Daniel," I called out, spotting the familiar figure in his navy fleece vest hunched over a datapad near the agricultural imports section. The human looked up, adjusting those wire-rimmed glasses of his in that nervous habit I'd noticed, though his expression remained placid. "Zex, hi. Good to see you." His voice carried that measured tone humans used for everything, whether discussing the weather or impending war. "How did the vegan colonies treat you?" I set down 2 of my sample cases, freeing my upper arms to gesture expressively. "Profitable enough, though the locals are nervous about hegemony expansion. They're offering premium rates for defensive technologies." I studied his face for any reaction. "I'm surprised you humans aren't capitalizing on the demand. Your people could make fortunes selling protection right now." Daniel simply nodded, making a note on his pad. "We prefer sustainable trading relationships. Short-term profits from fear tend to create long-term problems." There it was again, that maddening serenity. Around us, Korthak traders were loudly debating escape routes should the hegemony decide to annex this sector. Velkan merchants like myself were stockpiling emergency supplies and mapping alternate trade routes. Even the usually stoic Andromedans had begun traveling in armed convoys. But the humans? They conducted business as if nothing had changed. "You do realize," I said, lowering my voice and switching to the more private frequencies my species used for sensitive topics, "that Krell-Thax himself is expected here today? The hegemony's most aggressive territorial ambassador doesn't visit backwater trade stations for social calls." Daniel glanced up from his calculations, and for just a moment, something flickered behind those dark eyes. Not fear. Something else I couldn't quite identify. Then he smiled, that polite, empty smile humans wore like armor. "We're aware of the ambassador's itinerary," he said simply. "Would you like to review the mineral composite reports while we wait for the afternoon shipping schedules?" I found myself staring at him, my secondary brain struggling to process the disconnect between his words and the situation. The soft chatter of alien languages continued around us, punctuated by the occasional announcement echoing through the station's corridors. Somewhere in the distance, a cargo loader's mechanical whir signaled another trader preparing for hasty departure. And yet, Daniel Chen sat there, calmly reviewing trade manifests as if the galaxy wasn't balanced on the edge of a blade. Perhaps humans simply didn't understand the scope of what was coming. It was almost endearing, in a tragic sort of way. "Of course," I replied, settling my bulk into the reinforced chair across from his workstation. "Though, I have to ask, aren't your people concerned about maintaining supply lines if the hegemony decides to restructure this sector's governance?" Daniel pulled up a holographic display showing mineral purity analyses his fingers moving across the interface with practiced efficiency. We've found that most problems resolve themselves if you give them enough time and space to do so. I chittered softly, the Velkin equivalent of a bemused laugh. Time and space aren't luxuries the hegemony typically offers, my friend. They prefer immediate compliance and absolute control. So we've observed, Daniel said, highlighting a particularly promising rare earth sample. These Altarian crystals show excellent resonance properties. Your extraction teams have really improved their techniques. The casual dismissal of galactic politics in favor of trade minutiae should have been reassuring. Business as usual, after all. Instead, something about his tone made my tertiary stomach clench with unease. There was a quality to human calmness I'd never quite understood, like the stillness before a storm that even our most sensitive atmospheric equipment couldn't detect. Around us, the station's normal rhythms continued. A group of hegemony sympathizers huddled near the information kiosks, their scaled faces animated with excitement about the coming order and stability. Freelance security contractors openly advertised their services to nervous merchants. The air recyclers worked overtime, carrying the mixed sense of a dozen different species' anxiety pheromones. And through it all, humans like Daniel simply existed. Not hiding, not fleeing, not even appearing particularly concerned. They processed orders, updated shipping manifests, and discussed quality specifications with the same methodical attention they'd shown for months. Daniel, I said, leaning forward and lowering my voice to barely above a whisper, what aren't you telling me? He looked up from the display, those dark eyes meeting mine directly. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw something vast and cold swimming in their depths, like staring into the space between stars. Then, he adjusted his glasses again, and the moment passed. I'm not sure what you mean, Zexhai. Would you like to review the shipping insurance options? Given the current uncertainty in the sector, some traders have been requesting additional coverage. The way he said uncertainty made my carapace prickle, as if the massing of the largest hegemony fleet in recent memory was merely a minor inconvenience, like a delayed cargo shipment or a fluctuation in exchange rates. Perhaps that was simply how humans processed existential threats, by reducing them to manageable business concerns. It was either admirable or deeply disturbing. I was beginning to suspect it might be both. The alarm chime that echoed through the station's corridors wasn't one I'd heard before. 3 ascending notes followed by a pause, then repeated. Around me, the usual chaos of the trading floor began to shift. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they grew quieter, more focused. I noticed the human merchants I'd been dealing with exchange glances that seemed to carry entire conversations. Then I heard it. The rhythmic thoom, thoom, thoom of heavy boots against deck plating. Power armor, and lots of it. The metallic tang in the air grew sharper, mixing with something else, ozone, like the moment before a lightning strike. My secondary arms instinctively moved to check my sidearm, while my primary hands continued sorting through manifest data, trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Ambassador Krelthax entered the main concourse like a force of nature. Even among the hegemony's warrior caste, he was impressive. 8 feet of scarred chitin and ceremonial battleplate, flanked by a dozen of his personal guard. Their weapons weren't drawn, but the energy cells hummed with barely contained power. The smell of ozone intensified. What struck me most was the silence that followed in their wake. Not the terrified quiet of prey animals, but something more unsettling. The kind of silence that falls when predators are evaluating each other. Krelthax's voice boomed across the concourse, amplified by his armor's speakers. By order of the Hegemony Council, all human territories within the Kepler sector are hereby required to submit tribute of 20% of all trade revenues, effective immediately. Compliance is not optional. I watched the human delegation approach. 3 individuals in simple civilian clothing, led by a woman who couldn't have stood more than 5.5 feet tall. No weapons, no armor, no ceremonial displays of power. If I hadn't known better, I'd have mistaken them for clerks. Ambassador Sarah Okonkwo, I learned her name later from station records, stepped forward with the kind of calm I associated with deep meditation or profound exhaustion. Ambassador Krelthax, she said, her voice carrying clearly without amplification. We appreciate you making the journey to deliver the Hegemony's request. However, we must respectfully decline. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through Krelthax's guard. The ambassador himself leaned forward slightly, his compound eyes glittering. You decline? Little human, perhaps you misunderstand. This was not a request. No, Ambassador, I understand perfectly. The woman's tone remained conversational, almost gentle. And our answer remains the same. We will not be paying tribute to the Hegemony. She paused, clasping her hands behind her back in a gesture that somehow managed to look both respectful and final. This is your final warning, Ambassador. Please reconsider your current course of action. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the station's ambient hum seemed muted. I felt my gill slits flutter nervously as I tried to process what I'd just heard. A final warning? From them? To him? Krelthax's laughter was like grinding stone. A warning. From humans. He turned to his entourage, mandibles clicking in amusement. The galaxy grows stranger each cycle. When he turned back to the human delegation, they were already walking away, their movements unhurried and purposeful. The woman didn't look back as her voice carried one last time across the suddenly cavernous space. Safe travels, Ambassador. The Hegemony delegation's departure should have signaled a return to normalcy. The station's main thoroughfare should have filled again with the usual cacophony of trade negotiations and gossip. Instead, I found myself standing in an increasingly empty corridor, watching something that made my chitinous plates prickle with unease. The humans were leaving, not fleeing. That would have made sense. Not arguing among themselves about the ambassador's demands. That would have been expected. They were simply, methodically, calmly, packing up their operations and departing the station. I watched Maya Chen, the human merchant I'd been negotiating with just hours earlier, directing the loading of her entire inventory onto transport shuttles. Her movements were efficient, practiced as if she'd done this many times before. When she noticed me staring, she offered that same serene smile. Change of plans, HFY, she said, sealing the last cargo container with a decisive click. Market conditions, you understand. Market conditions. The mechanical whir of cargo loaders filled the space where her laughter had echoed just that morning. I'd grown accustomed to that sound. Humans laughed often, sometimes for reasons that escaped me entirely. Now there was only the efficient hum of departure preparations. The ambassador's demands weren't unreasonable, I found myself saying, though I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to defend Krelthax. Perhaps your government could reconsider. Oh, we've considered everything very carefully, Maya Chen interrupted, shouldering a personal bag. Our response was quite final, I'm afraid. Final. The word echoed in my mind as I watched her board the shuttle. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, I could see other human vessels undocking from the station in a steady stream. Not rushed, not panicked, orderly, planned. The corridor felt different now. My footsteps echoed where they should have been absorbed by crowds. The sterile bite of recycled air seemed sharper without the constant chatter of human voices to soften it. Even the artificial gravity generators sounded louder, their gentle hum now noticeable in the growing quiet. I made my way to the observation deck, thinking perhaps I could understand this exodus better from a wider perspective. What I saw made my secondary hearts skip beats. Human ships weren't just leaving Kepler 442, they were leaving in formation. Cargo vessels, passenger transports, even the small courier ships that handled inter-system mail, all departing in the same direction, away from hegemony space. My communicator chimed. A message from my usual human suppliers, all variations on the same theme. Suspending operations in this sector indefinitely. Recommend you do the same. Safe travels. Recommend I do the same? Why would they? The realization hit me like a decompression breach. They knew something. All of them. Every human on this station had received the same information, the same warning, the same instruction. I thought of Ambassador Krelthax's dismissive laughter, his casual threats, his certainty that humans would bend to hegemony will. I thought of the human diplomat's calm voice. This is your final warning. Standing there in the emptying station, watching the last human transport disappear into hyperspace, I began to understand that perhaps we had fundamentally misunderstood what those words meant. 3 days out from Kepler 442, I was settling into the familiar rhythm of deep space transit when my ship's communication array erupted in a cacophony of emergency signals. The automated distress beacon cut through the usual background chatter of subspace traffic like a scream in a library. I nearly dropped my morning meal supplement as the proximity alarms joined the chorus. My 4 hands moved instinctively across the control surfaces, bringing up tactical displays that made my secondary hearts skip beats. The beacon's origin signature marked it as Hegemony Military, a patrol fleet operating in this sector. The coordinates were only 6 hours away at maximum burn. Standard galactic law required any vessel capable of rendering aid to respond to military distress calls, regardless of political affiliation. Besides, my trader's curiosity was thoroughly piqued. Hegemony patrol fleets didn't send distress signals, they caused them. When I dropped out of hyperspace at the beacon's coordinates, the sight that greeted me defied immediate comprehension. Where my instruments indicated a 7-ship patrol fleet should have been, I found pieces. Thousands upon thousands of pieces, tumbling slowly through the void in an expanding cloud of metallic confetti. The cold vacuum of space had preserved everything in perfect, horrifying detail. What had once been the pride of hegemony naval engineering now drifted as twisted sculpture. Hull plating curled like flower petals. Support beams bent into impossible angles, entire sections of ships compressed into dense cubes of metal and circuitry. My ship's sensors painted the debris field in stark blue wireframes across my displays. 7 ships worth of material, scattered across nearly 1,000 cubic kilometers of space. But the distribution pattern was all wrong. Instead of the chaotic explosion debris I expected, everything was organized, sorted, as if some incomprehensibly powerful force had methodically disassembled each vessel and arranged the pieces with surgical precision. I guided my ship deeper into the field, my manipulator arms steady on the controls despite the growing tremor in my limbs. Chunks of armor, plating the size of shuttlecraft, drifted past my viewports, their surfaces bearing scorch marks from weapons I couldn't identify. The metal showed signs of exposure to temperatures that should have vaporized it entirely, yet there it was, twisted, tortured. but intact. The silence was absolute. No emergency transmissions, no survivor pods broadcasting location beacons, no signs of life. Just the endless, patient dance of debris in the starlight. When I finally located the source of the distress beacon, my tertiary stomach clenched. The signal was coming from what remained of the fleet's command ship, a massive dreadnought that had been compressed into a rough sphere barely 50 meters across. The vessel's original length had been over 800 meters. I suited up and crossed to the wreckage in my maintenance pod, the acrid smell of burned electronics filling my helmet's recycled atmosphere, even through the environmental filters. As I approached the compressed hull, I could make out fragments of the ship's name etched in hegemony script. Inevitable victory. The irony was not lost on me. Whatever had done this possessed technology so far beyond conventional understanding that calling it advanced seemed inadequate. This was the work of forces that treated the laws of physics as mere suggestions, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a terrible certainty began to form. I found the destroyer Cathfar drifting at the edge of the debris field, its emergency beacon broadcasting a civilian distress protocol, standard procedure when military vessels needed non-combatant assistance for search and rescue. My trader's credentials and the Universal Salvage Rights Code got me through the airlock without challenge. They were too desperate for help to turn anyone away. The emergency lighting aboard the Cathfar cast everything in hellish red strobes as I pulled myself through the twisted corridors. My breathing apparatus recycled the acrid stench of burned electronics and something else, something organic that made my primary stomach churn. Each flicker of the failing lights revealed fresh horrors. Bulkheads sheared clean through as if by some impossible blade. Control panels fused into abstract sculptures of melted metal and crystal. I found the first survivor in what had once been the navigation center. Sub-Commander Vex Thul, a veteran Krithari warrior whose kind were bred for battle, huddled behind an overturned console. When my suit lights found him, he flinched like a hatchling. "Sub-Commander," I called through translator. "What happened here?" His mandibles clicked in a rapid staccato, a fear response I'd never seen from his species. The metallic taste of terror pheromones leaked through my suit's filters, making my own pulse quicken. "They came from nowhere," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the groaning hull. "Ghost ships. No signatures on sensors until they were already firing." "How many attackers?" I asked, steadying my recording device despite my trembling hands. "Unknown. Maybe 3, maybe 30. They phased in and out of reality." His compound eyes darted to the shadows beyond my lights. The engagement lasted 6 minutes, 43 seconds. 6 minutes to destroy an entire patrol fleet. 6 minutes. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. The Cathfar alone carried firepower to glass a small moon. The full patrol fleet could have held off a hegemony battle group for hours. "Impossible," I breathed. Vex Thul's laugh was a broken thing. "Tell that to the 7,000 crew who aren't breathing anymore." He gestured weakly toward a shattered view screen. "Watch the logs. See for yourself." The bridge recorder was damaged but functional. As the grainy footage played, I watched sensors track normal space one moment, then suddenly register massive energy signatures in impossible formations. The attacking ships, if they were ships, appeared as geometric impossibilities on the tactical display, their positions shifting in ways that hurt to contemplate. The weapon signatures were unlike anything in known databases. No plasma, no kinetic rounds, no antimatter warheads. Instead, the attackers seemed to reach out and simply edit their targets out of existence. Whole sections of hegemony vessels didn't explode or melt. They just stopped being there, leaving perfectly geometric voids in the hulls. "Did you identify the attackers?" I asked, though a cold certainty was already settling in my chest. Vexthul's whisper carried a note of broken disbelief. Clean lines, precise cuts, no unnecessary destruction. He looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. "They disabled our engines first, then our weapons, then our life support. Methodical, surgical. They could have vaporized us instantly, but they gave us time to evacuate the worst hit sections." The emergency lights flickered again, and in that moment of darkness, I tasted my own fear pheromones mixing with his. When the light returned, I was already backing toward the airlock. "Who shows that kind of restraint in battle?" Vexthul called after me, his voice echoing through the dying ship. "What kind of monster holds back while it's killing you?" I knew the answer. I just didn't want to believe it yet. Back aboard my own ship, I pulled up the tactical data I downloaded from the Kethvar's computers. The precision was surgical. Each shot placed to disable rather than destroy. Each target selected to minimize casualties while maximizing psychological impact. This wasn't the work of pirates or rebels. This was a military operation conducted by someone who understood hegemony ship design better than the hegemony did. My communications array chimed with an incoming priority transmission. The face that appeared on my screen belonged to Captain Zulkar of the heavy cruiser Bone Render, the only ship in the patrol fleet that remained fully operational. "Traitor Zexhai." His voice carried the hollow tone of someone in shock. "You're documenting this?" "For the historical record," I confirmed. "Captain, your ship appears undamaged. How?" "They left us intact on purpose." He cut me off, his scarred features grim in the blue glow of his bridge lighting. "We were the command vessel. They wanted witnesses." His claws drummed against his command throne in an agitated rhythm. In 40 years of military service, I've never seen anything like it. They appeared without warning, struck with impossible precision, then vanished back into whatever void spawned them. Did they make any demands? Any communication? Zulkar's laugh was bitter. Nothing. Complete silence except for one thing. After they finished their work, we received a single transmission on all frequencies. Just 2 words in perfect galactic standard: "Final warning." The words hit me like a physical blow. My 4 hands gripped the console as the pieces fell into place. The humans' calm evacuation from Kepler 442, their polite but firm refusal of hegemony demands, and now this demonstration of overwhelming force delivered with surgical precision. "Captain," I said carefully, "in your professional opinion, who has this level of technology?" His silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the transmission had failed. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Only one species has ever shown this combination of technological superiority and tactical restraint. But that's impossible. The humans are barely spacefaring. They have no fleet, no weapons, no—" The transmission cut to static. I sat alone in my pilot's chair, surrounded by the soft hum of my ship's systems and the cold light of distant stars. The taste of my own fear pheromones lingered in the recycled air as I stared at the debris field outside my viewport. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, ghost ships moved with purpose I was only beginning to understand. The humans had given their final warning. The galaxy should have listened. The urgent beeping of my communication array pulled me away from the wreckage analysis. 3 priority messages had arrived while I'd been documenting the impossible devastation, each one adding another layer of ice to the growing dread in my chest. I settled into my pilot's chair, 4 arms working the controls with practiced efficiency, while my breathing grew increasingly shallow. The soft blue glow of the holographic star map materialized before me, casting eerie shadows across the cramped bridge as I overlaid the incoming reports with known patrol routes. The first message came from my trade partner Vexmol, his usually steady voice crackling with static and barely controlled panic. Zexhai, avoid the Kepler 186 shipping lanes. The entire 3rd Patrol Wing, gone. Debris field stretches for 3 light minutes. Whatever did this, it wasn't pirates. My secondary hearts began hammering as I marked the location on the map. Kepler 186 was 2 sectors away from my current position, nearly 40 light-years distant. The second transmission originated from a hegemony emergency beacon. This is Admiral Vorthak of the 7th Battle Group. We are under attack by unknown vessels. They appear to be using some form of stealth technology. They're here, then they're not. Our weapons can't lock on. Send reinforcements to... The message cut to static, timestamp showing it was recorded just 6 hours ago. I marked another location, my hands trembling slightly as the pattern began to emerge. 3 different sectors, 3 different fleets, all hegemony forces. The third message made my blood turn to ice water. It was from the Emergency Broadcast Network, an automated distress compilation that aggregated reports across known space. Multiple fleet engagements reported in Sector 7, 12, and 15. Estimated combined losses: 47 capital ships, 132 escorts. Engagement duration consistently reported as under 10 minutes. No enemy casualties confirmed. All survivors report identical phenomena: attacking vessels described as translucent, ghost-like, or phase-shifting. The holographic display pulsed with red markers now, each one representing a hegemony fleet that no longer existed. The attacks formed a rough circle around human space, like a protective barrier being methodically constructed. But that was impossible. Humans barely had a functioning navy. Everyone knew that. They were traders, diplomats, farmers, not warriors. Yet as I stared at the tactical display, another memory surfaced. The absolute calm in Ambassador Okonkwo's voice when she delivered humanity's final warning. Not the bluster of someone making empty threats, but the quiet certainty of someone stating a simple fact. My communication array beeped again, another priority message incoming. I almost didn't want to read it, but my trembling finger activated the display anyway. All non-hegemony vessels are advised to maintain safe distance from military engagements. Civilian traffic will not be harmed. This is a human fleet advisory. The transmission origin showed as unknown, but the calm, measured tone was unmistakably human. They weren't even trying to hide their involvement anymore. I slumped back in my chair, all 4 arms falling limp at my sides as the terrible truth crystallized in my mind. The galaxy had dismissed humanity's warning, laughed at their weakness, mocked their restraint. We'd made a catastrophic mistake. The humans hadn't been weak. They'd been patient. And now that patience had run out. I pulled up the star charts again, my breathing coming in short, ragged gasps as I traced the destruction with one trembling finger. Every attack had been surgical, precise, targeting only hegemony military assets while leaving civilian vessels untouched. The efficiency was terrifying in its implications. Another beep from the communications array made me jump. This time, it was a general broadcast on all frequencies. The signal so clear and strong, it could only be coming from a massive transmitter array. To all species of the galactic community, The Terran Federation regrets the necessity of military action. Hegemony forces continuing aggressive expansion toward human territories will be met with appropriate response. All civilian traffic remains under our protection. We encourage peaceful resolution to this conflict. The message repeated in 17 different languages, each translation perfect, each tone maintaining that same unsettling calm that had chilled me back on Kepler 442. I sat in the growing darkness of my bridge, watching the red markers multiply on my tactical display as more reports flooded in. The hegemony's mighty fleets, the same armadas that had conquered half the known galaxy, were being systematically dismantled by an enemy they couldn't even see clearly. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept hearing Ambassador Okonkwo's voice. "We've given our final warning." The galaxy should have listened. The ceremonial war braziers cast everything in hellish red light, their flames reaching toward the vaulted ceiling of the grand war chamber like grasping claws. Heat pressed against my carapace from all directions, not just from the fires, but from the barely contained rage of 24 hegemony warlords seated in their towering judgment thrones. The air itself seemed to vibrate with their fury. I stood in the center of the chamber's obsidian floor, all 4 of my arms trembling despite my best efforts to appear composed. The weight of their collective gaze felt like gravity from a dying star, pulling at my resolve. Behind me, the massive doors had sealed with a finality that made my stomach acids churn. "Traitor Zexhai," Warlord Krelthax's voice boomed from the highest throne, each syllable echoing off the chamber walls like thunder. "You claim to have witnessed the destruction of our fleets. Tell us of these ghost ships." The way he pronounced those last words dripped with such disdain that I nearly lost my nerve. But the images were burned into my memory. The twisted metal, the impossible precision of the attacks, the terror in those survivors' eyes. "Honored warlords," I began, my voice barely carrying in the vast space. "What I witnessed defies conventional understanding. The human vessels appeared from nowhere, struck with weapons that seemed to bend reality itself, then vanished. Our fleets never had a chance to—" "Enough!" The roar came from Warlord Vexhan, his massive fists slamming against his throne's armrests. "You speak of humans as if they were warriors instead of the weak, soft creatures they are. Our scouts report their colonies are barely defended." A chorus of agreement thundered through the chamber, the combined voices of the warlords creating a sound like an avalanche. I felt my respiratory slits flutter in panic, but pressed on. "With respect, warlords, I believe those are the colonies they want you to see. The attacks I witnessed were isolated incidents." Warlord Krelthax's voice cut through mine like a plasma blade. "Ambushes by cowards too weak to face us in open battle. When our full might descends upon their pathetic homeworld, they will beg for the mercy we denied them." The heat in the chamber seemed to intensify as the warlords roared their approval. Ceremonial weapons were drawn and thrust skyward, their edges gleaming in the brazier light. The sound was deafening, primal, terrifying in its absolute confidence. I tried once more, raising all 4 arms for attention. "Please, honored ones," the humans issued a final warning. They spoke with certainty. "The only certainty," Warlord Vexhan snarled, rising from his throne to his full imposing height, "is that humanity will burn for their insolence. Ready the Grand Armada. Every ship, every weapon, every warrior. We will show these humans what happens when insects sting a predator." The chamber erupted in bloodthirsty cheers that made my bones ache. As I was escorted out, my last glimpse was of the warlords already huddled over tactical displays, their massive forms silhouetted against the red flames as they planned what they believed would be humanity's extinction. They had heard my words, but not my meaning. Walking through the corridors of the war fortress, I felt like I was drowning in my own certainty of doom. The metallic taste of fear coated my mouth as I made my way to the observation deck. Through the reinforced transparisteel, I could see the orbital shipyards of Fex Prime stretching into the distance like a mechanical constellation. Even now, barely an hour after the Council's decision, the yards buzzed with frantic activity. Sparks cascaded from welding operations as weapon systems were hastily upgraded. Supply ships moved in endless streams, their cargo holds bulging with munitions and provisions. My communicator chirped with an incoming message from my ship's AI. "Captain, I've received priority orders from Hegemony Command. We are to accompany the Grand Armada as an observer vessel to document humanity's defeat for the historical archives." The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted me to record what they believed would be a glorious victory. Instead, I suspected I would be witnessing the greatest military disaster in hegemony history. I pressed my face closer to the viewport, watching as the first wave of battleships began moving into formation. The Devastator-class dreadnoughts looked like floating cities, their hulls bristling with enough firepower to crack planets. Escort carriers disgorged clouds of fighter craft that moved in perfect geometric patterns. The sight should have been reassuring. Surely no force in the galaxy could stand against such overwhelming might. But I kept remembering the survivors' words. They appeared from nowhere, like shadows given form. I kept seeing those twisted hull fragments cut with surgical precision by weapons that left no energy signatures, no trace of their origin or nature. The humans had spoken calmly when they issued their final warning. Not with the bluster and rage I was witnessing now, but with the quiet certainty of someone stating an immutable fact. The way someone might mention that gravity pulls downward, or that stars eventually die. A chill ran through my carapace despite the station's warmth. Tomorrow, the largest military force ever assembled by the hegemony would depart for human space, confident in their superiority. And I would follow, carrying recording equipment to document what I increasingly believed would not be humanity's end, but our own. The brazier's red glow still seemed to flicker behind my eyes as I made my way back to my ship. In 12 hours, we would discover just how catastrophically wrong the warlords had been. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble before I even saw the first ship rise from the military shipyards. What started as a subtle vibration through the soles of my boots quickly escalated into a bone-deep rumbling that seemed to emanate from Vex Prime's very core. I pressed my 4 hands against the observation deck's reinforced transparisteel windows, watching in awe as the largest military mobilization in hegemony history unfolded before me. The first dreadnought to lift off was the Eternal Dominion, a massive wedge of dark metal and bristling weapon arrays that stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its plasma drives ignited with a roar that shook the entire orbital platform, casting everything in brilliant blue-white light. The heat wash hit the observation deck moments later, and I could feel the thermal regulators in my environmental suit working overtime to compensate. But the Eternal Dominion was just the beginning. One by one, the pride of the hegemony fleet rose from their berths like ancient titans awakening. Battle cruisers, heavy destroyers, carrier groups with their attendant swarms of fighters, each ship larger and more heavily armed than entire planetary defense fleets. The combined thunder of their engines created a symphony of raw power that resonated in my chest cavity, making my pulse hammer against my carapace. I counted 300 capital ships in the first wave alone, their hulls gleaming with fresh armor plating and weapon systems that could crack planets. Fighter craft swarmed between them like metallic insects, their formations so precise they moved as a single organism. The sight was magnificent and terrifying, a display of military might that had crushed a dozen civilizations over the past century. For the first time since witnessing those ghostly human attacks, I felt something resembling hope flutter in my thoracic chamber. Surely no force in the galaxy, no matter how advanced or mysterious, could stand against this armada. The humans had destroyed isolated patrol fleets through surprise and unknown technology, but this was the concentrated fury of the galaxy's dominant empire, assembled specifically to eradicate the human threat. The blinding light from thousands of plasma drives turned the space above Vex Prime into an artificial star. I had to adjust my visual filters twice as more ships continued rising. Support vessels, logistics carriers, mobile repair platforms, even the dreaded planet-killer dreadnoughts that hadn't seen action in 50 years. The electromagnetic interference from their combined drive systems created aurora-like patterns in Vex Prime's upper atmosphere, sheets of green and purple light dancing across the sky. Admiral Thexmore's flagship, the Galactic Supremacy, rose last, a command vessel so massive it required its own escort fleet just to protect its blind spots. Its communication arrays alone were larger than most civilian ships, and the gravitational distortion from its drives made the nearby debris field shift and realign. As I watched this incredible display of hegemony power, I found myself almost believing their confidence was justified. Perhaps the War Council was right. Perhaps the humans had simply gotten lucky with their early strikes, catching isolated fleets off guard. How could any species, no matter how technologically advanced, stand against this overwhelming force? The ground finally stopped trembling as the last support vessels cleared the atmosphere, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burned atmosphere and the lingering heat signatures on my thermal sensors. Above us, the assembled armada began forming into attack formations, their running lights creating new constellations in the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, the hegemony would prove victorious after all. The departure began at dawn, though on Vex Prime, that meant the sky turned from black to deep crimson as the system's dying star crested the horizon. I stood on the observation deck of the orbital shipyard, my forearms pressed against the reinforced transparasteel, watching the most magnificent and terrifying display of military might I had ever witnessed. The first wave launched with a sound that seemed to originate from the planet's core itself, a deep, thrumming roar that vibrated through the station's superstructure and into my bones. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities ignited their fusion drives in perfect synchronization, their engine wash painting the darkness in brilliant blue-white fire. The heat from their passage warmed the transparasteel beneath my palms even through the station's shielding. Wave after wave followed. Battlecruisers, destroyers, carrier groups, each formation larger than most planetary defense fleets. The combined light of thousands of engines turned the void into a blazing highway of destruction pointed directly at human space. The ground beneath my feet trembled continuously now, a rhythmic pulse like the heartbeat of some colossal beast awakening for war. I should have felt reassured. This was power on a scale that dwarfed anything I had seen in my 40 cycles of trading across the galaxy. Surely nothing could stand against such overwhelming force. The humans might have their mysterious ghost ships, their impossible weapons, but they were still just one species facing the concentrated might of half the galaxy's military powers. Yet, as I watched the armada form its battle lines in the darkness beyond Vex Prime's gravity well, That familiar knot of unease twisted tighter in my stomach. I kept thinking of those human merchants, packing their goods with such calm efficiency. The way they had smiled, not with fear or bravado, but with something that looked disturbingly like pity. The final command ship, Supreme Admiral Korthvex's personal flagship, passed close enough to the station that its engine wash rattled the observation deck supports. Through the brilliant glare, I caught a glimpse of its hull, kilometers of armored death, bristling with enough firepower to crack a moon. It should have been inspiring. Instead, it felt like watching a procession. The fleet began its jump sequence, and space itself seemed to hold its breath. Reality rippled as thousands of ships prepared to tear holes in the fabric of space-time. I had already received permission to follow in my small cargo vessel, ostensibly to document the hegemony's glorious victory, though I suspected I would be recording something far different. As the last of the armada vanished into hyperspace, an eerie silence settled over the shipyard. The sudden absence of engine roar left my ears ringing. Through the viewport, only cold starlight remained, distant and uncaring. The wash of heat from the massive engines faded, leaving the transparisteel cold against my skin. I turned away from the observation deck and headed toward my ship. Whatever I was about to witness in human space, I had the sinking certainty that the galaxy would never be the same afterward. The hegemony's mightiest fleet was sailing toward what they believed would be humanity's destruction. Somehow, I suspected they were sailing toward their own. I had positioned my cargo hauler at what I thought was a safe distance from the Sol system, my sensors recording everything as the Grand Armada approached humanity's home. The warlords had been so confident, so certain of their overwhelming superiority. 10,000 ships strong, bristling with plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Pathetic, Admiral Vextar had sneered over the comm as his dreadnought led the formation past my position. Look at their systems, X-High. Empty. The cowards have already fled. But as I leaned closer and peered at my sensor readings, something felt wrong. The Sol system appeared completely undefended. No orbital platforms, no patrol ships, nothing but the quiet glow of Earth and its neighboring worlds. It was too empty, too quiet. The hegemony fleet spread into attack formation as they crossed the system's outer boundary. That's when it happened. Space itself seemed to shimmer. At first, I thought my sensors were malfunctioning. The electromagnetic pulse that washed over my ship scrambled my instruments for a terrifying moment, leaving me blind and deaf in the void. When the systems flickered back online, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Stars were being born. Thousands upon thousands of points of light materialized throughout the Sol system. Not the harsh glare of hegemony warships, but the cool, steady illumination of human vessels emerging from nothing. They phased into existence like ghosts, becoming solid, surrounding the Grand Armada in perfect spherical formation. Above, below, behind, everywhere I looked, human ships continued to appear, their hulls gleaming with an otherworldly luminescence. My forearms trembled as I tried to count them. 20,000. 30,000. The numbers kept climbing until my sensors simply gave up, displaying error messages instead of tactical data. Each human vessel was sleek and organic looking, as if grown rather than built, their surfaces rippling with patterns that hurt to look at directly. The comm channels erupted in confusion and panic. Where did they come from? Impossible. How many are there? Admiral Vextar's voice cut through the chaos, but even his usual arrogance had cracked, replaced by something I'd never heard from a hegemony commander before: uncertainty. But it was the silence that truly terrified me. Despite outnumbering the hegemony 3-1, the human fleet made no aggressive moves. They simply waited. No weapons powered up, no targeting locks, no demands for surrender. Just tens of thousands of impossible ships floating in the darkness like patient predators, their presence warping the very fabric of space around them. I realized with dawning horror that everything we'd witnessed before, the destroyed patrol fleets, the ghost ship attacks, had been humanity holding back. This was their true strength. This was what they'd been trying to warn us about. The Grand Armada, that magnificent display of hegemony might I'd watched depart with such ceremony, suddenly looked like children's toys floating in an ocean of nightmares. And in the eerie silence that followed, I finally understood what those calm human merchants had known all along. The galaxy had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The silence lasted exactly 17 seconds. I know because I was counting my own heartbeats, each one thundering in my ears like a war drum. Then, the humans began their demonstration. The first sound I heard was impossible, a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate not from their ships, but from the fabric of space itself. It started as a whisper, barely perceptible through my ship's hull, then grew into something that made my bones vibrate in harmony. My translator couldn't process it. The frequency existed outside any known spectrum of communication. I watched through my viewport as reality began to bend. The lead human vessel, a sleek predator of impossible angles, simply shifted sideways through dimensions I couldn't name. Space folded around it like liquid metal, and suddenly it existed in 3 places simultaneously, each one solid, each one real. The hegemony's targeting computer screamed in confusion, trying to lock onto a target that occupied multiple coordinates at once. When the humans fired, I understood why the survivors had called them ghost ships. Lances of coherent energy erupted from the human fleet, but these weren't the crude plasma bolts or particle beams I knew. These weapons twisted space-time itself into a cutting edge. I watched a hegemony dreadnought, 5 kilometers of reinforced battle steel, simply cease to exist along a perfectly straight line. Not destroyed, not vaporized, deleted. The 2 halves floated apart with surgical precision, their edges smooth as glass. The smell hit me then, seeping through my ship's recycled atmosphere despite all filtration. Ozone, yes, but underneath it something else, something that made my mind recoil. It smelled like the space between atoms, like the pause between thoughts. The smell of reality being rewritten. My hands found my recording device without conscious thought, all 4 arms working in desperate harmony to document what might be the last moments of my species' dominance. Through the viewfinder, I watched hegemony ships return fire with everything they had. Fusion torpedoes, gravity cannons, weapons that had conquered 1,000 worlds. Every shot passed harmlessly through the human vessels. They weren't dodging. They weren't absorbing the damage. The weapons simply missed existence. The human ships phased in and out of reality like thoughts becoming solid, choosing when and where to be real. A destroyer materialized inside a hegemony cruiser's shield envelope, fired once, then faded back into whatever dimension they called home. The harmonics grew stronger, until my ship's hull sang with frequencies that hurt to hear. Through my translator, I caught fragments of human communications, calm, clinical, terrifyingly precise. Displacement successful, target neutralized. Phase variance at optimal, proceeding to grid 77 alpha. Confirming non-lethal parameters. Disable, don't destroy. Non-lethal parameters. Even now, even while demonstrating power that made gods look like children, they were holding back. The hegemony's greatest fleet was being dismantled like a training exercise, and the humans were restraining themselves. I pressed all four hands against my viewport, watching the systematic deconstruction of everything I thought I knew about warfare, about physics, about the possible. In the space of minutes, the mighty Grand Armada had been reduced to drifting hulks and disabled vessels, their crews alive, but utterly helpless. The visual distortions were getting worse. Space itself seemed to ripple around the human fleet like water, disturbed by some massive, invisible hand. Stars flickered and wavered through the interference, their light bending in ways that made my eyes water. I had to look away twice when the distortion became so severe that my brain simply refused to process what it was seeing. A hegemony battlecruiser attempted to ram one of the human vessels in desperation. I watched its captain's final act of defiance as the massive ship accelerated toward what appeared to be a smaller human destroyer. At the moment of impact, the human ship simply wasn't there. The battlecruiser passed through empty space, but somehow emerged from the other side with its engines dead and its weapons offline. The human ship rematerialized exactly where it had been, untouched. My recording device was overheating in my trembling grip, its sensors overwhelmed by energies it had no framework to measure. The readouts showed impossible values: negative mass, inverted time, spatial coordinates that existed in 11 dimensions when there should only be 4. Through it all, the humans maintained their eerie calm. No battle cries, no victory songs, no rage, just clinical efficiency that was somehow more terrifying than any berserker fury could have been. They moved through the hegemony fleet like surgeons excising a tumor, each cut precise and purposeful. The last functional hegemony command ship tried to retreat, its captain finally understanding the futility of resistance. But space folded in front of it, creating twisted reality that no ship could cross. The humans had turned the very cosmos into a cage. I realized I was hyperventilating, my respiratory system struggling to process air that tasted of ozone and impossible mathematics. My ship's environmental systems were working overtime, trying to filter out particles that shouldn't exist and energies that had no name. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the demonstration ended. The harmonics faded to silence. The visual distortions smoothed back into normal space. The human fleet hung motionless among the wreckage of hegemony pride, their ships now fully solid and real, no longer phasing between dimensions. In the sudden quiet, I could hear my own labored breathing echoing off my ship's walls, and somewhere in the distance, the emergency broadcasts of 1,000 defeated crews calling for mercy from an enemy they had never truly understood. The humans had made their point with devastating clarity. The galaxy's self-appointed masters had been reduced to helpless observers of their own obsolescence in less than an hour, and somehow, I knew the real message was still coming. The silence that followed the carnage was somehow more terrifying than the battle itself. I floated there, in my vessel, watching debris from what had been the most powerful armada in galactic history drift past my viewport like cosmic snow. My forehands trembled against my control console, the chitinous plates of my fingers clicking involuntarily against the smooth metal surface. Then, the transmission came. It wasn't broadcast on any military frequency. It came through the standard civilian channels, the same ones used for trade negotiations and weather reports. The crystal clarity of the human voice cut through the electromagnetic chaos left by their impossible weapons like a blade through silk. Attention, Hegemony forces. This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. I had expected rage, triumph, the victorious roar of conquerors claiming their prize. Instead, the human's voice carried that same measured composure I had witnessed at Kepler 442. That terrible, patient certainty. We warned you. We asked you to reconsider. We gave you every opportunity to choose a different path. Through my sensors, I could detect the labored breathing of survivors aboard the crippled Hegemony vessels. Emergency life support systems wheezed and stuttered. Somewhere in the wreckage, I could hear the faint distress calls of trapped crew members, their voices thin with terror and disbelief. "This ends now," the Admiral continued, and those 4 words carried the weight of absolute finality. "The Hegemony's expansion is over. Your tribute fleets will stand down. Your occupied territories will be liberated. Your war machine will be dismantled." I found myself adjusting my translation implant, certain I had misunderstood. But no, the human wasn't negotiating, wasn't making demands. He was simply stating facts as calmly as one might describe the weather. Any attempt to retaliate will be met with the complete dissolution of your remaining fleet. Any act of aggression against civilian populations will result in the immediate occupation of your core worlds. Any harm that comes to prisoners of war or non-combatants will be deeply regretted. That last phrase made my carapace crawl. The way he said it, with genuine sorrow, was more chilling than any threat could have been. Around me, the human fleet maintained their impossible formations, ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, weapons that had rewritten the laws of physics before my eyes, and yet they held their fire now, waiting with infinite patience for a response that everyone knew would be surrender. "You have 1 standard hour to signal your compliance," Admiral Chen concluded. "We hope you choose wisely." The transmission ended, leaving only the soft hiss of my life support and the distant groaning of dying starships. I stared at my recording equipment, wondering who would believe this testimony. Who would understand that humanity hadn't revealed some hidden arsenal or secret alliance? They had simply stopped pretending to be what the galaxy thought they were. The Hegemony had mistaken restraint for weakness, patience for cowardice. They had ignored humanity's final warning because they couldn't conceive of a species that would choose peace when they possessed the power to enforce their will absolutely. Now, they knew better. We all did. 6 months later, I found myself back on Kepler 442, though the station bore little resemblance to the place I'd fled in terror. The first thing that struck me as my ship docked was the air itself, cleaner somehow. The perpetual metallic tang that had always lingered in the corridors was gone, replaced by something fresher. The life support systems hummed with a different rhythm, more efficient, less strained. As I made my way through the docking bay, I couldn't help but notice the changes everywhere. Where once only Hegemony-approved species had been permitted to trade, now the corridors teemed with species I'd never seen before. Small, crystalline entities that chimed musical notes as they moved, tall reptilian merchants with iridescent scales, even some of the reclusive void dancers who rarely ventured into public spaces. The diversity was staggering, yet everything moved with a peaceful efficiency that the old regime had never achieved. Human administrators were scattered throughout, identifiable by their simple uniforms and calm demeanor. They moved quietly among the crowds, resolving disputes with soft words and patient mediation rather than the iron-fisted authority the Hegemony had wielded. I watched one, a young woman with kind eyes, help a confused Thrakari trader navigate the new customs procedures, her voice gentle but professional as she guided him through each step. The relief I felt was palpable, like a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, the station felt safe. There were no hegemony enforcers prowling the corridors with their energy weapons and barely contained violence. No arbitrary inspections or sudden tribute demands. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over this place like a toxic cloud had simply vanished. Yet beneath that relief lurked something else, an awareness that made my secondary arms twitch nervously whenever I caught sight of the human patrol ships visible through the viewport. They hung motionless in the void like sleeping predators, their sleek hulls revealing nothing of the impossible technology contained within. I'd seen what those ships could do. I'd witnessed their casual dismantling of the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever assembled. The humans administered their new protectorates with the same unsettling calm they displayed before the war. They were fair, efficient, even generous in their governance. Trade regulations had been simplified, tariffs reduced, and corruption, the lifeblood of hegemony bureaucracy, had been eliminated entirely. Former hegemony worlds reported unprecedented prosperity and peace under human oversight. But I couldn't forget the sight of space-time itself bending around human weapons, couldn't shake the memory of that admiral's terrifyingly serene voice as he offered surrender to a broken armada. The humans ruled with velvet gloves, yes, but everyone in the galaxy now knew what lay beneath that soft exterior. As I walked through the transformed station, breathing the clean air and watching species that had been oppressed for generations trade freely for the first time, I found myself caught between gratitude and unease. The galaxy was undoubtedly better off under human protection than it had ever been under hegemony rule. The question that haunted me was simple. What would happen if humanity ever decided we weren't worth protecting anymore? I was reviewing cargo manifests in the main hall when I heard a familiar laugh, warm and genuinely amused, cutting through the comfortable hum of normal station activity. My forearms froze over my data pad as I recognized the sound. Maya Chen, the human merchant who had been so unnervingly calm 6 months ago when her people issued their final warning. She stood at the same trading booth where I'd last seen her, her graying hair still pulled back in that practical ponytail, discussing shipping rates with the Thraxian captain. The Thraxian, a species that had once proudly served the hegemony, was nodding eagerly, his mandibles clicking with what I now recognized as relief rather than the fear I'd expected. When Maya noticed me approaching, that same unsettling smile spread across her face. But now I understood it wasn't predatory. It was simply patient. Zexhai, good to see you again. How's business? Better than I expected, I admitted, my voice carrying more honesty than I'd intended. Much better. She gestured to a small cafe area that hadn't existed under hegemony rule. Coffee? I know you Velkans can process caffeine. The rich, earthy aroma of human coffee filled my nostrils as she poured from a thermal carafe. Real coffee, not the synthetic substitutes we'd grown accustomed to during the resource shortages of hegemony rule. The warmth of her genuine smile made something in my chest relax that I hadn't realized was still tense. I have to ask, I said, accepting the steaming cup. The ceramic was warm against my palm pads. That day, when Ambassador Krelthax made his demands, you all knew, didn't you? What was coming? Maya's expression grew thoughtful as she sipped her own coffee. Around us, the station hummed with activity. Dozens of species trading freely, children of various races playing in the newly constructed family quarters, the soft chime of fair trade agreements being processed. "We knew what would happen if they didn't listen," she said finally. "Humans have a saying, walk softly and carry a big stick. We prefer diplomacy, HFY. We always have. But we learned long ago that sometimes strength is the only language bullies understand." "But the restraint," I struggled to find the words. "Your people could have destroyed the entire hegemony fleet in minutes. Instead, you disabled them, gave them a chance to surrender." "Because we're not conquerors," Maya said, and there was something almost sad in her voice. "We never wanted to rule the galaxy. We just wanted to be left alone to trade and explore and make friends." She gestured around the station. "But when someone threatens innocent people, when they demand tribute from species barely scraping by while hegemony lords feast in luxury, well, someone has to step in." The coffee was bitter and complex, with undertones I couldn't identify. Human, like everything else about them. "Your people saved us all," I said quietly. "We just did what anyone should do when they see injustice," Maya replied. "The difference is, we had the capability to actually stop it." Looking around at the thriving station, at species trading as equals. For the first time in generations, I finally understood the weight of that gentle human smile. I sit in my quarters now, the amber glow of my recording device casting familiar shadows across the walls as I speak these final words into the galactic archives. Through my viewport, I can see the gentle pulse of navigation lights from the human patrol ships that maintain their silent vigil among the stars. Not the aggressive posturing of hegemony dreadnoughts, but the quiet confidence of guardians who need not announce their strength. The distant sound of laughter drifts through the station's corridors, children playing in the new family quarters that humans established in what used to be restricted military zones. Younglings of a dozen species chase each other through spaces that once echoed only with the heavy footsteps of hegemony enforcers. The air itself feels different now, cleaner somehow, carrying the scent of the hydroponic gardens humans installed to supplement our life support systems. Let this record serve as a warning to future generations. I speak into the device, my four hands steady for perhaps the first time since this all began. When humans speak calmly, when they issue their warnings with that peculiar serenity that we mistook for weakness, listen. Listen with every fiber of your being, because they are not speaking from fear or bluster. They are speaking from a position of such overwhelming strength that they can afford to be gentle. I pause, watching a human maintenance worker outside my viewport as she makes routine adjustments to a sensor array. Her movements are economical, precise, unhurried. Even in this simple task, I see the same quality that should have warned us all. The calm efficiency of beings who never doubt their ability to handle whatever comes. The galaxy believed the hegemony's rule brought order, I continue, my voice growing stronger with conviction. But what we had was not order, it was suppression. What we have now under human protection is something I never thought possible. True peace. Not the peace of the conquered, but the peace of the protected. The irony isn't lost on me that I, a simple trader who witnessed the end of one galactic empire and the birth of another, and perhaps the only being alive who saw humanity's transition from apparent victims to reluctant guardians. I watched them pack their belongings with the same methodical care they now use to rebuild our shattered sectors. Through my recording device's gentle hum, I can hear the station's new rhythm, the efficient whisper of improved life support, the multilingual chatter of free commerce. the absence of the fear that once permeated every transaction under hegemony oversight. Children who will never know the terror of tribute collectors sleep safely in quarters that were once interrogation chambers. We thought we understood power, I say, my voice barely above a whisper now. The hegemony showed us force, brutality, dominance through fear. But humans showed us something far more terrifying and beautiful. They showed us power with restraint, strength with mercy, the ability to destroy everything, coupled with the wisdom to protect instead. I reach out and touch the viewport, my reflection overlapping with the steady lights of the human vessels beyond. If you remember nothing else from this record, remember this. When humanity gives you a final warning, it truly is final. Not because they lack patience, but because they have already shown you more patience than you deserved. The recording device clicks softly as I end the transmission, and I settle back to watch the stars, grateful to live in a galaxy where the most powerful beings choose to be guardians rather than conquerors.